When a ruthless biker kicked a dog just for fun, he had no idea that the owner was none other than Sylvester Stallone. What started as a peaceful afternoon walk quickly escalated into a dramatic confrontation, one that reminded everyone watching that you should never mess with a man's dog. Before we dive into this emotional story, I want to say something to every single person reading this. We may never meet in this lifetime, but from the bottom of my heart, I wish you a life filled with happiness, love, and more blessings than you can count. There's a certain kind of California afternoon that feels like memory, even while you're living it. When the light turns gold, the ocean breeze carries a hush, and every step seems to echo something familiar. On one such day, just off the Venice Beach boardwalk, a man and his dog walked slowly along the sidewalk, not as celebrity and pet, but simply as two old friends. Sylvester Stallone, dressed in a gray hoodie, faded jeans, and a worn Dodgers cap pulled low over his brow, looked like any other aging local who'd lived long enough to stop caring about appearances. At his side was Butkus, a broad-shouldered, silver-muzzled bull mastiff with deep eyes and a lumbering gait. Together, they moved with the ease of a routine long practiced. Two survivors, quieter now, but still sharp in the ways that matter. People passed them without fanfare. A few glanced, some whispered, but most just walked by. Maybe they recognized him, maybe they didn't. Maybe they saw only an old man and his dog, and honestly, that was just fine by him. Butkus stopped near a palm-lined bench, sniffed at a cluster of wildflowers pushing through a crack in the concrete, and then looked up at Stallone with a wag of his tail. "You still find the little things interesting, huh?" Stallone murmured, kneeling slowly beside him. He pulled a collapsible silicone bowl from the front pocket of his jacket, filled it with water from a steel thermos, and placed it in front of the dog. Butkus drank eagerly. "You earned it," Stallone added, patting his head gently, then stood back up with a soft grunt. His knees weren't what they used to be, but he never complained. He'd taken harder hits, much harder. The air smelled of brine, hot dogs, sunscreen, and a trace of weed. Somewhere nearby, a street musician played an acoustic version of Eye of the Tiger, badly out of tune, but charming nonetheless. Tourists meandered with frozen lemonades, kids darted between bike racks and palm trees, and the world spun as usual. And then from just across the bike lane came the sound that snapped the calm like glass. Laughter, sharp, aggressive, mocking. Three men leaned against a row of parked motorcycles near the edge of the skate park lot. Their jackets bore stitched insignias, their arms covered in tattoos. One of them, tall and wide-shouldered with a blonde ponytail and a cigarette hanging from his lips, pointed toward Butkus and chuckled. "Look at that old mutt," he called out to no one in particular. "Looks like someone dug up a corpse and taught it to walk." The other two laughed. Stallone, who had heard a lifetime's worth of ignorant talk, said nothing. He simply gave the leash a gentle tug and continued down the path. Butkus followed, tail lowered, ears pinned back slightly. He sensed something, not fear, but a shift in energy. Stallone kept his shoulders relaxed, but his eyes swept the area with a subtle precision that came less from acting and more from decades of simply being alert. The men, however, were not done. The tall one stepped forward, flicking his cigarette to the ground and crushing it under his boot. "Hey, old man," he called, "your dog just barked at me. You should teach him some manners before someone else does." Stallone stopped, turning just slightly, just enough to keep the man in his peripheral vision. "He didn't bark," he said flatly. "He breathed. That's what dogs do." The biker smirked, took another step forward, then without warning raised his leg and kicked Butkus squarely in the ribs. The sound was immediate, visceral, and devastating. A thud followed by a sharp yelp and the scrabble of paws against pavement. Butkus stumbled sideways, collapsing near Stallone's foot, his breathing shallow and ragged. The world around them seemed to vanish. The music, the chatter, the breeze, everything became static. Stallone froze for a heartbeat, then crouched instantly beside his dog. His hands moved carefully across Butkus's ribs, feeling for damage, searching for signs. People began to gather. Someone gasped. A couple pulled out their phones. The biker, now emboldened by attention, puffed up his chest. "It's just a dog," he muttered. "Maybe next time it won't look at me funny." Stallone stood, eyes locked on the man's face, his voice low and steady. "That dog's name is Butkus. He's not just a dog. He's my family." The biker scoffed and turned back toward his bike. His friends nudged him, whispering something. A woman in a sundress stepped forward and said aloud what others were beginning to realize. "Wait, that's Sylvester Stallone." The man paused, glanced back, then laughed dismissively. "What, like Rambo's gonna come after me?" Another laugh, louder this time, but thinner, less confident. Stallone knelt again beside Butkus, who was now trembling but conscious. "You're okay, big guy," he whispered. "I've got you." From the edge of the crowd, a woman in green scrubs with a UCLA badge stepped forward. "I'm a vet tech," she said. "He needs to get checked immediately. There's a clinic on Lincoln, 4 blocks north." Stallone nodded. "Can you help me get him there?" She didn't hesitate. "My car's right around the corner." Together they lifted Butkus into the back seat of her Subaru, Stallone cradling the dog's head the entire way, whispering to him, urging him to stay awake, stay with him, just like before. The ride was short, but every second felt infinite. Stallone's mind wasn't on the cameras that had caught the incident, nor the gathering crowd, nor even the identity of the man who had vanished down the street on a black motorcycle. All he could think about was the rise and fall of Butkus's chest, and the way it had slowed. By the time they arrived at Pacific Paws Animal Clinic, a staff was already waiting outside with a gurney. Dr. Harper, a compact woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and confident hands, immediately took charge. "Bring him in. We'll take it from here." Stallone stayed behind the glass doors, watching them wheel Butkus down the hall, disappearing into a brightly lit exam room. His fists were clenched, his jaw tight, but his eyes looked tired. Moments later, Dr. Harper returned, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Your dog is stable, but he's got significant bruising, possibly some internal trauma. We're sedating him now and running scans. He's tough. He's got fight in him." Stallone nodded, swallowed, and managed a thin, grateful smile. "He always has," she added gently. "You did the right thing getting him here so quickly." As the sky darkened outside and the clinic's fluorescent lights hummed above, Stallone sat in the waiting room, alone, his hands resting on his knees, replaying every step of the walk, every word spoken, every second he wished he could rewind. Somewhere out there, the man who kicked his dog was still roaming free, laughing perhaps, not knowing or not caring what he'd just done. But Stallone knew, and he wasn't about to let it go. The smell of antiseptic and quiet murmur of machines filled the waiting room, like a low tide pressing gently against the walls. Sylvester Stallone sat alone, motionless, in a worn blue chair that creaked whenever he shifted his weight. The fluorescent lights above buzzed softly. Outside the wide clinic window, dusk had finally surrendered to the calm of night, and the streets of Venice Beach slowed into silence. A nurse walked by and offered him coffee, but he declined with a polite nod. His focus was singular, on the closed door at the end of the hall where Butkus lay sedated, hooked to tubes, and surrounded by sterile equipment, his breathing shallow but steady. Stallone wasn't new to hospitals, though this was different. It wasn't for him. It wasn't scripted. There were no retakes. This wasn't a scene, and this time he wasn't the one in pain. This time it was his companion, his living memory of the past, the only creature on earth who'd known the weight of his silence and never asked for words. Dr. Harper eventually returned, her expression more relaxed than before. She explained that Butkus would remain overnight for observation. There was bruising, but no internal bleeding, no ruptures. "He's lucky," she said, then paused, "but he'll be sore for a while. He needs rest, pain meds, and calm." Stallone thanked her quietly, wrote his cell number down on a post-it, and told her to call if anything changed. Before leaving, he stepped into the recovery area, where Butkus lay on a padded bed, his frame still, a small oxygen tube running beneath his snout. The dog's eyes fluttered open for a second, just enough to recognize him. Stallone leaned in and touched his head. "You rest now. I'll handle the rest." And with that, he turned and walked out into the California night. He didn't go home. Instead, he drove aimlessly down Lincoln Boulevard with the windows down and the radio off. The moon hung low over the Pacific, casting silver ripples across the waves. His mind replayed the moment, again and again. The biker's laugh, the cruel kick, the helpless sound that came from Butkus's throat. It wasn't just rage that burned in him now. It was something heavier, deeper, something like guilt. He'd spent decades playing tough men on screen, delivering justice in sound stages and on backlots. But earlier that day, when the moment called for it in real life, he'd frozen. He hadn't stopped the kick. He hadn't protected the one thing that never stopped protecting him. And that failure clung to his chest like wet cement. He pulled into an empty parking lot beside a shuttered taco stand and sat in the darkness, hands still on the wheel. For the first time in years, he felt small. Not because of age or fame fading or the ache in his bones, but because somewhere out there, a man who had casually hurt a defenseless animal was walking around like nothing happened. And worse, no one seemed to care. That wasn't going to be the end of it. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a well-worn flip phone, one of the few things he still preferred old school, and dialed a number he hadn't used in months. It rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. "Hank Milano." Stallone didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. "It's me. Something happened." The voice on the other end instantly softened. "Sly, you okay?" "I'm fine," Stallone replied. "But someone hurt Butkus." There was a pause, then Hank responded, "Where are you?" "Venice, the clinic off Lincoln. They kicked him, hard. He's sedated now." Hank cursed quietly under his breath. "Give me the details." Stallone explained everything, what the guy looked like, the make of the motorcycle, the patch on his vest that read Southland Reapers in jagged red stitching. Hank was quiet as he listened, scribbling notes, his voice turning harder. "These guys have a record. Vandalism, bar fights, suspected dog fighting last summer, but nothing stuck. I'll get someone on it. You'll hear from me before morning." Stallone closed the phone and sat for a long moment in the stillness of the night. He knew Hank would keep his word. They had history, real history, back when Stallone still sparred with live gloves and Hank was a beat cop trying to do right in a city too fast to care. Stallone didn't need blood. He didn't want vengeance. He wanted that man to know there were consequences. You don't just kick someone's dog and drive off into the sunset. The next morning came hazy and warm, like most mornings on the coast. Stallone returned to the clinic just as the blinds were being raised. Dr. Harper met him at the door, smiling. He's wagging his tail again. A little slow, but the meds are working. Inside, Butkus stood gingerly when he saw him, tail thumping weakly against the bed. Stallone knelt down, holding the dog's face in his hands, forehead against his snout. "You scared the hell out of me, buddy." Butkus licked his wrist and leaned into him. Dr. Harper gave instructions for care, a list of meds, a soft diet plan, and a warning to keep him calm for at least 2 weeks. Stallone thanked her, paid the full bill without blinking, and asked if there was a back exit. He didn't want reporters. Not today. Later that afternoon, Stallone received a text from Hank. "Got an ID. Eddie Knox, local. Belongs to the Reapers. We're watching him. Want to stay out of it?" Stallone stared at the message. Did he want to stay out of it? Part of him said yes. Let the law handle it. Let it fade. But the other part, the part that remembered sleeping on benches with the original Butkus, the part that remembered what it felt like to have nothing but a leash and loyalty, that part said no. He typed back one word. "Where?" Hank didn't answer right away, but an hour later, Stallone received an address. A rundown strip mall off Washington Boulevard, behind an abandoned pawn shop. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. He didn't need backup. He wasn't looking for a fight. But he needed Eddie to look him in the eye. He needed to make sure this man understood what he'd done. And if the law wouldn't put fear into him, maybe truth would. When Stallone arrived, the place was as expected. Graffiti on the dumpsters, broken neon signs, the stink of engine oil, and burnt rubber. A few motorcycles were parked under a faded awning, one of them unmistakably the same black and red cruiser from the beach. And there he was, Eddie, leaning against the wall, cigarette in one hand, phone in the other. He didn't see Stallone right away. Not until Stallone stepped forward and said quietly, "You kicked the wrong dog." Eddie looked up, sneered, and rolled his eyes. "You again? Thought you'd be home nursing your mutt." Stallone's voice remained level. "He's recovering. You won't." Eddie laughed, but it was short. Stallone stepped closer. His voice dropped into gravel. "You think you're tough? Try surviving 3 decades with no one but a dog. Try waking up every day with a body that screams, and the only thing that stays loyal is the one you kicked." Eddie's smirk faded just a little. "You talk big," he muttered. "You want something? Hit me then." Stallone didn't blink. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to stop you. And trust me, I just did." Behind him, sirens wailed in the distance, low at first, then louder, closer. Eddie turned, confused, just as 2 unmarked police cars rolled into the lot, tires grinding against gravel. Hank stepped out of the driver's side, nodding toward Stallone. "You did your part. Now let us do ours." Stallone didn't watch the arrest. He didn't need to see the cuffs or hear the rights being read. He turned, walked back to his car, and drove off without a word. But as he looked into the rearview mirror, watching the flashing lights fade behind him. There was a quiet satisfaction in his chest. He hadn't swung a fist. He hadn't needed to. But justice was moving now, and that was enough. The early evening sky was turning a soft amber as Sylvester Stallone drove back toward the clinic, the memory of flashing police lights still fresh behind his eyes. He didn't feel triumphant. There was no music swell, no crowd cheering, no raised arms at the top of some concrete staircase. What he felt was quieter, heavier, but more meaningful than any scripted victory. Justice hadn't come through violence or spectacle. It had come through truth and through the weight of a life lived long enough to know when to hold back and when to act. And now, with that chapter closed, there was only one place he wanted to be, beside his dog. When he stepped through the glass doors of the Pacific Paws Animal Clinic, the front desk nurse smiled knowingly. "He's awake," she said gently. "Wagged his tail as soon as he heard your name." Stallone's heart loosened a little. He followed her down the corridor, the pads of his shoes whispering over the linoleum, until he reached the recovery room. There, under soft lighting and hooked to a far smaller number of wires than before, lay Butkus. The old bull mastiff blinked slowly, then perked his ears at the sight of Stallone, and raised his head with effort. His tail thumped once, then again. Stallone walked forward, dropped to one knee without even wincing at the crack of his joint, and placed a steady hand on the dog's neck. "You didn't quit on me," he said softly. "Not then. Not now." Butkus gave a slow blink, a soft huff of air through his nose, and leaned into his owner's touch. Dr. Harper appeared behind him with a clipboard in one hand and a cup of decaf in the other. "His vitals are improving. We'll want to keep him one more night, just to be safe. But if all goes well, you can take him home tomorrow." Stallone nodded, but didn't move. He sat there on the floor beside Butkus, one hand resting on the dog's chest, feeling the rhythm of his breathing, letting it ground him like a heartbeat in the middle of all the noise. They stayed like that for almost an hour. Just a man and his dog. No camera, no script, no fight choreography, just something real. And for Stallone, real had become rare. The next day, under a soft coastal sun, and with a breeze that whispered like gratitude through the trees, Stallone carried Butkus in his arms out of the clinic. The dog had insisted on walking at first, but the lingering soreness in his limbs quickly convinced him otherwise. The car was already prepped with soft blankets and a little water bowl. As Stallone settled him into the back seat, he caught his own reflection in the rearview mirror. Tired eyes, stubbled jaw, creased forehead. But beneath all of it, a strange sense of peace. The house in Santa Monica sat quiet, tucked behind flowering hedges and a rusted gate that groaned like an old friend when it opened. Butkus was home, and for the next few days, the world outside didn't matter. Stallone adjusted his schedule, pushed back meetings, and let the studio know he wouldn't be back on set until Butkus was strong enough to walk with him again. He spent his mornings reading scripts with Butkus at his feet, his afternoons on the porch with the dog's head resting against his boot, and his evenings combing gently through Butkus's fur, while soft jazz played from an old speaker on the shelf. They didn't speak, of course, but the silence was full. On the third day, Stallone received a call from Hank. "Just wanted you to know," the sheriff said. "Knox was arraigned this morning. Animal cruelty charges, resisting arrest, and he's got priors. He's not walking away from this." Stallone didn't say much. He only asked, "Did he say anything?" Hank paused, then chuckled dryly. "Yeah, Something about not knowing whose dog it was. Said if he'd known, he wouldn't have done it. Stallone's voice was calm. That's the problem. He shouldn't have done it no matter whose dog it was. Hank let that hang for a moment, then agreed. You're right. That's why we're doing this the right way. That night, as the sun began to fall over the Pacific in a spray of gold and pink, Stallone and Butkus returned to the boardwalk. This time, they walked slower. The leash hung loose between them, and Butkus, though still stiff, moved with a steady rhythm. Some people noticed them. A few nodded with quiet recognition. One woman with silver hair and a stroller smiled and whispered to her partner, "That's him. That's the guy from the news." But Stallone didn't react. He kept walking, head down, one hand occasionally resting on Butkus's back. They reached the spot where it had all started, by the grass near the coffee truck. The same cracked concrete, the same palm trees bending in the breeze. But this time, it felt different. Not haunted, not bitter, just closed, complete. He paused there, looked down at Butkus, who had sat beside him and was staring out toward the waves. "You did good," he murmured. "You made it." The dog leaned against his leg, as if to say, "So did you." A young man passed by on a skateboard, slowed down, and then doubled back. He looked about 20, freckles on his face, and a nervous grin. "Excuse me, sir," he said. "Are you really, Rocky?" Stallone turned, looked the boy in the eyes, and smiled softly. "I'm just a guy walking his dog." The kid beamed. "Well, your dog's awesome." "Yeah," Stallone said, crouching down to stroke Butkus's head. "He is." As the boy skated off, Stallone remained there a little longer, watching the tide pull in and out, the same way it always had. He thought of all the years behind him, the faces, the noise, the applause that now felt like a distant storm, and he thought of Butkus, both of them. The first, who stayed with him when he had nothing, and the second, who came into his life at a time when he needed reminding of what mattered most. Not the lights, not the legends, but the bonds we don't explain, only feel. Before turning to leave, Stallone reached into his jacket and pulled out an old photo, folded and faded, of the original Butkus licking his face backstage on the set of Rocky II. He placed it gently in the grass, beneath a smooth stone, and whispered, "You're still with me, both of you." Then he stood, whistled low. Butkus got up with effort but determination, and together, once more, they walked down the boardwalk, two old fighters, still standing, still walking forward, side by side.